Welcome to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Cars.com. Here's your MotorWeek podcast host, John Davis.
Hello and welcome everyone to our MotorWeek podcast number 22. And we have a very, very special guest joining us by phone today to give us his impressions on some of the most recent cars that we've tested collectively. Joining us from Chicago is Cars.com Editor-in-Chief Patrick Olsen. Patrick?
Hey, John. How are you?
Great to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me here.
My pleasure. And our pleasure. In the studio with me today is also our road test producer, Brian Robinson.
Thanks for having me, John.
Anytime, Brian. And our head writer, Shamit Choksi.
Hey, John. How are you?
Good day, everybody. And remember, at the end of the podcast today, we will also have our lightning round, and we'll also look at our MotorWeek mailbag. But first, it's hard to believe we're gearing up for MotorWeek's 29th season. And we're kicking it off with something new. MotorWeek has teamed up with Cars.com for a very special review that we're calling our Power and Economy Drive. And what we set out to do is take 6 high-mileage cars and say, okay, while they often get advertised as great for commuting or great for one purpose for another, for a lot of folks, these vehicles will be their only car. So how do they do in all-around performance? What happens when you take them to extreme landscape? And that's exactly what we did. We took the 6 cars up to the mountains of western Maryland, near Cumberland, Maryland, and the Rocky Gap State Park area, where it's quite challenging as far as the elevation and the types of roads. And we drove them around for almost 3 days, about 500 collective miles, and recorded the mileage at various steps along the way, but more importantly, recorded our impressions. The 6 cars that we did include, fairly obviously, the Toyota Prius, also the Honda Insight Hybrid. Our third hybrid was the Ford Fusion Hybrid. We have 2 diesels on the trip, Volkswagen J, a TDI, which we picked as our car of the year. Also the Audi A3 TDI, which will be on sale early next year in the U.S. And rounding out our list, the Smart 4.2, a car that everyone has talked about, but mostly think is only suitable for the city. After we get done talking about that, we'll also talk about the 2010 Ford Taurus. But let's go back to the Power and Economy Drive. Okay, I'm going to take these down one by one, and let's all give our general opinions of what it was like to drive these cars on this trip, since we all drove them. First, kind of the king of the hill these days, I guess, as far as hybrids, the Toyota Prius. Comments? Patrick, why don't you start?
Sure. You know, I like the Prius in terms of the gas mileage it gets, and for 2010 it's been redesigned, so it's the third generation, and the interior has really, really been improved, I think. Now, that being said, I still have some questions and problems with it. The brake feel is still a little brick-like for me, and at high speeds, like on the interstate on the way out to the gap, the engine noise is a little loud for my taste. But that being said, I think it's still a step forward for Toyota.
I mean, I think we all were impressed with its mileage. At the end of this trip, it was still over 49 miles per gallon. But the point was, as you just made it, it wasn't by a long shot the most comfortable car on the cruise.
No, I agree. I thought the seats were passable, but there were some other ones that we drove that I enjoyed riding in for long stretches more.
Shamit?
The Toyota Prius is the king as far as I'm concerned. In the third generation iteration, to me, it looks like they're really trying to be a premium vehicle. I don't know if that's their place to do that.
What did you think about driving it, though, up and down the terrain? As far as, did it disappoint you as far as power, or just give me an idea about what was it like to drive?
I thought it was extremely smooth. I don't know. I mean, you guys seem a little bit disappointed by it. I didn't feel that way. I thought it was comfortable. I think it's one of these to each his own situations. I mean, we drove it all the way out to western Maryland, and I was comfortable in it all the way through and through.
Brian?
You can't argue with the fuel mileage numbers. They're certainly the king with that. But if you like to enjoy what you're driving, it's certainly not the choice for you. It's kind of like driving in a appliance around. You really get no enjoyment out of it whatsoever.
Yeah, it was kind of like blah. It certainly was. There was no sporting factor. Yeah. Number 2, a car that has been brought out and somewhat controversial, the Honda Insight, is a challenger to the Prius. Patrick, what were your thoughts on the Insight?
Well, I think it's interesting Shamit mentioned that Toyota likes to position the Prius, or maybe positioning the Prius as premium, because I think Honda's taking the absolute opposite approach with the Insight. They're saying, we'll get you into a hybrid for a lot less money. Well, at least a few grand less. And in some ways, I enjoyed the drive experience in the Insight better. I thought it was peppier off the start. Had a little more energy. It didn't get anywhere near as good a mileage as the Prius when I drove it. And it's got some issues of its own, but for a less expensive hybrid, and as a sort of rebirth of that car, I was pretty impressed with it.
The Insight had more of the sporting character that we see, or I should say at least entertaining character that we see in most Honda cars.
Yeah, definitely entertaining to drive. It felt a little not as solid, not as well built as the Prius. As far as styling, it's almost like a 3/4 scale Prius.
They went for that futuristic look, so people would know you were driving a hybrid. When we earlier tested a Honda Insight and Toyota Prius side by side, we got just slightly better mileage for the Prius. But on this trip, the Honda was about 40 and the Prius was about 49, so there was a big difference. Yeah. Shamit, anything?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's more sporting character, more fun to drive. It makes more sense to me as a hybrid. It's more affordable, and I think that's what my criticism about Prius is. It's getting away from being affordable.
Yeah, the mileage difference. We drove on a lot of big hills, and the Insight was really working to get it.
Yeah, smaller motor, and it really worked harder. The car that I think we talked most about out there is enjoying to drive as far as a hybrid, Ford Fusion hybrid, a car that really, to me, is a real car. It's not just a hybrid; it's an all-around car. Patrick, thoughts on the Fusion?
I really liked the Fusion hybrid. I was very impressed with it. I thought, in many ways, of the hybrids we drove, it was the most comfortable one I drove. For Ford, there are still a few things they need to work on. I think the engine noise was a little loud, but man, that car felt planted. When we went up and over hills and around curves, I didn't for a second feel like I got to slow this thing down or really ease off because I don't know how it's going to handle. Because it did really well in that.
Brian?
Yeah, I was very impressed with the Fusion hybrid. Very comfortable to drive, and over 600-mile range, which I love. And like I say, it's comfortable. You could have no problem running out the tank all day on that thing.
I mean, it's a real car. It did 32 miles per gallon. It's actually rated higher than the Camry hybrid. I just thought it was a no-compromise hybrid.
I think style-wise also, it's a great hybrid that doesn't scream hybrid. I mean,
but is that good?
I think it's great. Yeah. That's the one I would go with because I'm not out there to show everybody that I'm driving a hybrid. It's about me and the car.
Good for me. I'm not sure it's good for Ford, though.
People seem to want to advertise.
They want an eco-freak mobile. Say, hey, look at me. Look what I'm doing for the environment. The rest of you are not as good as me.
Exactly. And I wonder if Ford isn't going to maybe lose out a little bit because, you look at what GM does with hybrids, and holy cow, they've got 20-inch tall letters on the Tahoe hybrid that says, I'm a hybrid, So
and generally speaking, it hasn't worked.
Right.
Yeah. Transitioning, we have 2 diesels on the trip. Everybody in Europe says, you don't need hybrids. You can get by with a diesel. They give comparable mileage. Very impressive vehicles. Let's take the Volkswagen Jetta TDI, but I should preface it and say that they did very, very well, but they didn't do as well as either the Honda Insight or the Toyota Prius. But having said that, a lot of other benefits to the Jetta TDI. Right? Let's start again with Patrick.
For me, the Jetta TDI was wow. I mean, I love driving that car. It had a great transmission. It was a stick shift, and it was just a blast to drive. And the great mileage is just a bonus. I mean, everything else about that car was fun and useful, and I could absolutely see myself in it as a daily driver.
Yeah, that was a manual transmission car, but to you, that was a true sports sedan, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It didn't matter whether it was diesel or whatever.
No, right. It could have been gerbils under the hood. I was just pretty happy with it.
Brian?
Yeah, definitely my pick of the overall winner for that is, as Patrick mentioned, fun to drive. And again, with the hills, some of the hybrids were really laboring going up the hills. When you got all the torque of the diesel, you don't even have to downshift. Just give it a little more throttle and scoots right up the hill, keeps the engine from working as hard. I think a better everyday solution.
One of the quietest turbo diesels we've also seen, and at 38 miles per gallon, nothing to sneeze at.
Yep.
Brian?
Brian?
Sorry,
Well,
Schmeat.
you can't forget Farfignugan as well.
Farfignugan. What did it really mean? I never really remember what Farfignugan mean. I guess it didn't matter.
It's
very esoteric.
Want people to know it,
Yeah. Schmeat, any comment?
I don't even know why I'm sitting here because these guys are hitting on everything I'm
No.
saying. No, excellent.
Well, it just means you have to think harder.
Excellent packaging, looks great. We made it our car of the year for those reasons and everything else that Patrick and Brian are saying. So it deserves to be on top.
Here's the interesting part. That same engine in the Audi A3 TDI got actually a little bit better mileage. And there it had the double clutch automatic transmission, so you actually didn't lose as much time during shifts. Did everybody like driving it as much as the Jetta, or are we just too jaded because we like manuals? Any comments?
No, I think you've hit something on the manual thing there because I didn't mind driving the A3, but two things. One, I'm a big guy, and it felt kind of tiny to me, and I felt kind of cramped in it. And two, the driving experience was good, but it was nothing compared to shifting up and down, going over hills and around curves. The Jetta was just a lot more fun.
Having said that, though, for the average person that maybe either can't drive a manual transmission car or doesn't want one, since you can also get this automatic an automatic Jetta, do you think it's a reasonable alternative?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the transmission was great, especially with the double clutch. It kicked down when it had to. It upshifted when it needed to. I never felt like I was lagging at all. So I think that was fine. It's just as a personal preference, I preferred the stick.
Schmeat, any comments about the A3? I'll let you go before Brian.
This was my favorite of the 6 cars that we
Really?
took. Yeah. It was just one thing is, of course, it's efficient and clean. You know what's going on. Mileage-wise, it did fine. It did great. What were the final numbers?
Basically, the A3 got about 38, and actually, I misspoke before, the Jetta got about 36.
Right, so 38, and it's so much fun to drive. This was my pick. I mean,
there's also something to be said for the ambiance of an Audi. I mean, it's a beautiful car inside.
Yeah,
you felt like you're in a premium vehicle.
Definitely, you felt European too.
Yeah, it felt European. Is that a good thing?
It feels more premium compared to the Jetta, but also it's a little tighter inside, which, as Patrick mentioned, it can be a little cramped, but it kind of adds to the fun factor. You feel a little sportier. And the thing, I think, was a little sportier to drive, too, as far as staying a little flatter in the corners.
Speaking of tight, and I've saved this one for the last, the Smart 4.2. All right, be kind. Who wants to go first?
I think we should let Schmeat go first.
Yeah, go ahead, Schmeat. Smart 4.2.
Well, it's funny that we took this out to the mountains of western Maryland. I agree with you. What you said up front, John, was that it's a city car.
This is the highest mileage non-hybrid car you can buy in America. That's why it's on the trip.
Right. Okay. And if I lived in Berkeley or some little hamlet out in Europe, I'd love this car. Take it out on Route 70 at 85 miles an hour with a bunch of 18-wheelers, and it's super scary.
I will give some defense to the car.
Yeah.
I actually drove it on the interstate more than anybody else, and I actually had a good time with it. I mean, it was foot to the floor and everything it would do to keep up with the traffic on the interstate.
Yeah, but I'm a fatalist, John. You're very
and it's true. I've lived longer than you are. You have, I guess. When you get by a semi, and the tires are taller than you are, it is a little scary. But it didn't get blown around in the wind nearly, or from the passing vehicle, nearly as much as I expected.
Right.
Now, I know Patrick's got some strong opinions about the Smart.
Well, it's funny, John, is one of the things that I recognized on this trip was that when we got returning back from Western Maryland, you're like, well, you guys go ahead and I'll catch up to you. And by the time we got where we were going, you were ahead of us. So, clearly the Smart car is not quite, as much the laggard as everyone says.
Right.
And on the interstate, I'm with you that it felt planted. My only problem with that car is the brakes are like putting a 2x4 against the tire and slowing them down. And to me, that alone, and then the transmission that lags severely when you're going at slower speeds between gear shifts, drive me nuts.
They haven't proved that, though. There's been, I understand they've done a reprogram, and it's better than the one we tested a year ago. Brian?
The 4.2 is still not quite a real car to me, but it's surprisingly fun to drive, and it's very optical illusion. Like, you can't believe there's that much room inside that thing when you see it from the outside. But when you're driving it, I mean, it's very spacious in there.
I mean, we could nitpick it to death. For instance, the package shelf on the back has got no lips, so if you put anything on it, it rolls off onto the floor and all that. But I guess I came away with much more respect for the car than I had going in. It's a real car. You can use it, as an everyday driver, or if you have to, for a longer trip, and not feel like you're taking it completely out of its element. It's not a Nirvana, but it's more than a city car, I think.
It's still got to be a second car, though. I don't think that could be your only car. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I will say that the cockpit was surprisingly roomy. I mean, it reminds me of the Mini Cooper in that it looks tiny, but once you sit in it, it's pretty comfortable once you get in there.
So we'll all be having the full results of our Power and Economy Drive coming up on MotorWeek soon, and also there'll be companion articles written by the staff of Cars.com giving their impressions of the route and who they like best. And so it was lots of fun to do, and thanks everybody for joining us. Patrick, thank you for your staff joining us.
It was a lot of fun.
But stay on the line now, because we're going to transition now to another car, a very, very important car for Ford Motor Company and the U.S. auto industry, and that is the new 2010 Ford Taurus. Brian Robinson, you've had the most experience in the Taurus.
Yeah, all new for 2010, as you said. I'm very impressed overall. It's really good looking. It draws a crowd everywhere you go, especially the SHO. They brought that back. It's still a very big car.
It's a full-size car, not like the old Taurus was more of a mid-size car. I guess the original
Fusion,
Taurus, I should say.
Which is the size of the Fusion is now. But drove it at the track yesterday. Very impressive. No turbo lag. We had the EcoBoost twin turbo, and the thing just takes off the line. You can tell that it's set up for 0 to 60 times because the thing takes off. I think we got a 5.5 0 to 60, and then it kind of peters out from there, and you finished out the quarter mile. But really fast off the line. It handles very well for a big, heavy car. You don't forget that you're in a big, heavy car, but it is a pretty good handling big, heavy car.
Patrick, I know you've had less experience in the Taurus, but you have had a chance to see it and so forth. Any first impressions?
Well, so, around here, one of the criticisms we've had about it is that compared to its main competitors, it seems a little tight inside. That, a couple of the guys here have driven it complain that it's not as roomy inside as its competitors. And so, Brian, I don't know if you felt that. I sat in and it didn't seem too bad to me, but these guys have taken it out more often than I have.
No, I definitely noticed that for their flagship large vehicle.
It's a big car on the outside.
It's very tight inside. They wanted to give it that more coupe performance-like feel, which I'm not sure, as you mentioned, is the right thing for your big luxury car.
A lot of that room went to the trunk, though. You open that up, you could probably fit 3 or 4 guys in there.
Well, the car is based.
Take pictures of it.
The car is based on the previous 500/Taurus, which at the time when that came out, they advertised it had room in the trunk for 13 small golf bags or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I thought rear legroom was surprisingly tight. I think that's what got me, is that for all this size of car, it wasn't quite as spacious back there. When I think full size, I think
Lincoln Town Car.
Lincoln Town Car, I guess.
Right.
It's not that, but. What a looker, what a performer, and beautiful interior. I mean, I think it
continues the evolution for Ford and GM both of really improving their cars to the point where they're much more competitive with both the Japanese and the Europeans. And, I think as people talk about the future of the American auto industry, these are the kinds of cars that they're going to have to keep building consistently to make this work.
Patrick, what did you think about the concept of taking a mass-produced V6 engine, putting 2 turbos on it to try and replicate the power of a V8 but get more like V6 fuel economy? You think that's a good approach? I mean, Ford's going to be doing this a lot.
I think it's a great approach. I know that we've driven the Ford Flex with the EcoBoost. We've driven the Taurus with the EcoBoost, and we've got another. I can't remember what's coming. Another one of the Fords that has it, and I think it's a great idea. And I think, on top of quality cars, it's nudging that gas mileage up, while still keeping some power, because clearly Americans don't want anemic powered cars. They want cars that can go, and now they want cars that can go and get 35 miles to the gallon. And I think they got to find that sweet spot.
Yeah, I mean, the pressure's on to improve the fuel economy over the next few years because of the new government mandates. I was overall very impressed with the car. I think basically it's got great performance, and even the standard powertrain will be quite fine for most people, don't you think, Brian?
Yeah, 3.5 liter, 260 some horsepower. So yeah.
So
can I be a naysayer for 1 second?
Yeah.
Love the show. I'm very impressed with the Taurus overall. I'm just wondering, the show has a starting price of $37,000. The one that we have in is $45,000. I don't know who's going to buy a Ford Taurus at that price.
Well, the show before was their the top of the line, very premium.
Back in the 90s.
But it's a halo car. Clearly,
I think kind of made a big deal about money is no object. This is our flagship. And as other brands do with their flagships, we're going to throw everything at it we can, and what it costs is what it costs.
And people come in and look at that, and then they end up buying the regular car. I mean, that's kind of the
draw.
Yeah. Very good. Thanks, everybody. All right, let's move on now to our lightning round. Michelle's got the bell ready, right? All right. And when we hear that, we can either ignore it or we can stop. Anyway, here is our question. Do you think the Cash for Clunkers program was a success? And if so, should it be tried again next year or a few years down the road? Patrick, weigh in on Cash for Clunkers.
So I think part of it was a success. It was clearly that they got people to turn in gas guzzlers, and by and large, they've turned them in for much more fuel-efficient cars. So in that sense, I think it was a success.
Anybody else? Shamit?
I think that they should do this every 2 to 3 years. I mean, it cleans up. It'll help clean out and clean up the whole country in terms of what's out there on the roads. And I think it worked.
No controversy here, Brian.
Good success for the dealers, that's for sure. I mean, we're in and out of dealers all the time, and I haven't seen that kind of traffic at the local dealers in years.
But here's where I think is bad for dealers is that, they're low on inventory, and once it ends this time, I think they're going to have a desert stretch there because all the people who had any interest in buying a car have done something about it. I suspect that it's going to be kind of, fallow for a few months after.
I think there'll be some drop-off, but, most of the stuff that was traded in were people's, third car. Yeah. And so there were cars they would not, everybody's saying, it's going to rob future sales. Sure, it's going to do somewhat of that. But think about it. These were cars that probably would have not been traded in. So we may go back to the same kind of lame market we had before Cash for Clunkers, but I'm not so sure it's damaged that much of what sales it would already been. But I guess we'll find out in the next month or so.
Yeah, I think a lot of the environmental groups are saying we didn't go far enough as far as requiring it to be even a higher fuel mileage.
Well, you're always going to hear that.
And the thing is, if you'd done that, you would have left the domestic automakers completely out of it, and you would have them complaining. So I called it the most successful catastrophe the U.S. government's done recently. And just because they so mismanaged the program, it's a wonder it worked at all. All right. Very good. Thanks, everybody. Let's move on now to our MotorWeek mailbag. If you've got a question you'd like to answer it on our podcast, visit www.motorweek.org. You can submit the question. If chosen, you receive a free MotorWeek T-shirt. Ooh, no oohs and ahs this week. I guess you've already got yours. Right? Thank you, Patrick.
Been there.
Yeah.
All right. The question comes from Darian in Delaware. That rhymes almost. Darian in Delaware. He asked, okay, our mechanic says to change our oil every 3,000 miles. Owner's manuals say anywhere between 5,000, 7,000, or even 10,000. Who should we believe? Patrick, you want to swing at this?
Sure. If you believe ExxonMobil and people like them, you should change it every 1,000 miles. But no, I would say honestly, I think every 5,000. My Kia Sedona owner's manual says every 7,500 miles. Even I think that's too long, but I do it every 5,000 miles myself.
Go ahead, Brian.
Always stick with the owner's manual, if it says 5. Some of the German cars, 15, 20, they're pushing it even farther. But
here's the dilemma, and we on our website, Pat Goss, our technician, still says 3 months or 3,000 miles. And the theory there is, number one, if you drive in a city environment, it gets very dirty, and the dirt is actually what can cause damage in your engine. So if the oil gets dirty, it circulates dirt. The other aspect is, since nobody checks under the hood anymore, it means at least 4 times a year you would check under the hood and make sure everything's right. I think even Pat, however, these days, when you get around to some of the synthetics, thinks, well, maybe 5 if you have a chance. He's not here to defend himself. My personal thought is 5,000 miles is more realistic. But it depends on the kind of driving you're doing. If it's in a very dirty environment, you might want to do it sooner. And you are worried about the additive package wearing out, and most of them do wear out around 5,000 to 6,000 miles.
Mm-hmm.
So,
John, also one thing I think is crucial there that you hit on is, even if you're going to change your oil every 5,000 miles, check your oil, regularly, every month, every other month. Because I know, my wife's fan, she doesn't check it that often. One time I checked it was incredibly low on oil. And, you may not drive that many miles, but especially as they get older, they may go through oil faster. So it's important to keep checking on that.
And also, when you've got very low oil and you first start the car up when it's cold, when most of the damage can be done, there's not much oil to circulate, and you can really shorten the life of the engine.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, very good. Let's bring this podcast to a close. I want to thank everybody that was with us today. Patrick Olsen, Editor-in-Chief, Cars.com, thank you very, very much for joining us by phone.
Thanks, John.
Road Test producer Brian Robinson, our writer Shamit Choksi, thank you guys for being here. Audio engineer Jim Bigwood, who can't speak back at us at the moment. Our podcast creator Bob Mixer, thanks to him. And our producer, the lady on the bill, Michelle Parker. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you'll join us for our next MotorWeek podcast and on PBS and Speed TV for more MotorWeek. I'm John Davis. We'll talk to you soon.
You have been listening to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Cars.com. For additional information on podcasts, videos, and showtimes, visit our website at motorweek.org. And watch MotorWeek, television's longest-running automotive magazine series each week on your local PBS station.